Hello and good evening. My name is Melanie McNair. I'm the Senior Director of Public Programming here at the Center for Fiction. How many of you are visiting us for the first time tonight? Awesome. Welcome. The Center for Fiction is a 200-year-old cultural nonprofit, and our mission is to encourage people to read and value fiction and to support its creation and enjoyment. We do this through public events like this one and partnerships, reading groups, writing workshops, robust membership offerings, all offering vibrant, accessible, and inclusive programs that welcome a wide community to experience the joy of story. Let's see, please visit our site and sign up for our mailing list and follow us on social media. If you like what you see, become a member. Stay tuned for all of our activities. I hope you leave here tonight with a plan to come back again soon. For example, next week, a week from today, come back for part 2 of the Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival takeover to meet Diane McCauley. Before I turn this over to Marcia, I'm going to go over a couple of bits of housekeeping. For the audience Q&A, if you are in the room, please raise your hand and one of our fabulous interns will bring a microphone to you. That's so the folks who are watching on the live stream can hear your question as well. And if you're watching on the live stream, you can type your question into the chat at any time and we'll read those for you. And when the event is over, Lauren will do a personalization line on the other side of this wall. She's kind enough to pre-sign all the books. So if you want to get home into your slippers and your robe because it's 8 degrees outside, you can buy a book and take off. It's already signed. But if you want to stick around and chat with her and get a cocktail, please stay. And now it's my pleasure to welcome one of the co-founders of the Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival, Marcia Messiah.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. On the second night of the Caribbean takeover of the Center for Fiction during Black History Month, I would like to thank the Center for Fiction for allowing us to barge into the Center for Fiction during Black History Month for what I think is their very first Caribbean takeover for this month. And you might wonder, well, why Caribbean history during Black History Month? And tonight is like a really special intersection of lots of things, and there are no coincidences. And I'll tell you why. The Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival is an organization that's dedicated to the upliftment of Caribbean stories and Caribbean writers wherever they live in the world, starting first with the United States and North America, and the rest of the diaspora, and then the region. We have a prize that's dedicated to the memory of Dr. Elizabeth Nunes, who is our namesake. Dr. Elizabeth Nunes' birthday is today. And she wrote this groundbreaking essay in which she credits the civil rights movement for her being here. And I want to just read a tiny excerpt, and I'm hoping to link this whole thing together. She says in this essay, in 1964, the Civil Rights Bill ending racial discrimination was passed. 1 year later, in 1965, legislation removed the national origins quota system as a criterion for immigration. Until this bill was passed, the annual quota for all of Asia was 2,900 compared with 149,667 for Europe. She's talking figures, right, of immigrants, and 1,400 for all of Africa. Though the criteria for immigration were revised in 1965, the new regulations were not implemented until 1968. Too many immigrants of color do not acknowledge their debt to African Americans. By immigrants of color, I'm referring to all those who, because of the removal of the criterion regarding national origin from the Immigration Act of 1965, have enjoyed the opportunities that America has to offer. People from the Caribbean, from Africa, Latin America, Arab countries, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, India, Korea, Japan, China, etc. Even immigrants from Eastern European countries, given America's preference for Western Europeans, have benefited from the struggles of African Americans for racial equality. I know who opened the doors for me to America. I know when I stepped through those doors, my feet sank in a pool of blood. Too often, I think immigrants of color are ignorant of this history. Too often, they distance themselves from the ongoing struggle by African Americans to end the racism directed toward them. And in this climate, when she wrote that essay, she would not have known in this moment in history what would have been going on in our country. She would not have known that we would be celebrating in the year of our Lord 2025, the Caribbean takeover at the Center for Fiction in Black History Month. She would not have known that the Casualties of Truth by the BCLF would be celebrated and launched. You know what I mean? So like, this is like so important a moment for us on her birthday. And it just kind of underscores the work that we're doing at the BCLF to knit all of the threads of our stories, diaspora stories together, which really are the stories of the universal human experience. And the BCLF itself is a cross-section of the anatomy of the Caribbean writer who exists at all layers of the creative body, from the not yet published writer, who was Cleyvis, who's who's her conversation partner. When we met Cleyvis, she had submitted her essay to our contest in 2019, to Lauren, to Diana's event next week, who won our prize. Like, we're doing this work to sort of enmesh all the resources for Caribbean writers in this community of love and a truly safe space where, if nothing else, Caribbean writers can luxuriate in their truth. The BCLF, we hope, will be a safe space that they can be anchored and held by the stories that have been passed on by our ancestors and remixed in the diaspora with their own observations. Lauren is what happens, I think, when you sow seed into ground that's fertile with the soil of culture and of memory and of love, and when people do not forget where and who they come from. All of Lauren's work is undergirded by that. I think Lauren is what happens when people come to make a different life, but do not buy into the lie that causes them to trade their system of calculating values. And I would like to personally thank her parents and her community for allowing her to remain in close enough proximity to Calypso and Carnival and the stories of her people and Eric Williams and Black Power, so that she lives to tell generations of offspring of that same branch and other branches of the Caribbean tree that they are worthy and that all jobs are Black jobs. I want to thank Lauren's parents for allowing her to write stories like Book of the Little Axe and Till the Well Runs Dry, where Rosa Rendon, who's a free Black woman, is inserted to Native American history, and books like Casualties of Truth, where Prudence Wright is a lawyer whose father is a gifted mathematician from Trinidad. But more personally, and on a very personal note, Lauren has been a true friend and confidant to the BCLF, more valuable in ways to us than I can tally. And so tonight, I would ask if you would just give her a round of applause for the launch. I'm calling this your launch in Brooklyn of this phenomenal and amazing novel. Lauren, we love you. We appreciate you. Cleyvis is the author of a forthcoming novel, Grand Paloma Resort, that is launching in August, but we're delaying it to September, which is when the BCLF Festival #7 happens here at the Center for Fiction in September 2025. And you all have to come back. And you have to come back next week again, where we have a Jamaican writer, Diana Macaulay. You're going to get obsessed with us, right? Is launching her book next week here at the Center for Fiction. So without further ado, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for supporting Caribbean Stories. If it's your first interaction with a Caribbean story, I pray that it's not your last. And let's have a good time and buy her book. Thank you.
I'm so glad you're here. Look at this suit. Can we have a little commotion for this outfit? Lauren is going to read for us, but I thought we could warm you up a little bit.
Gotta turn it on. How about that? We're so loud, we actually...
I have never been told in my life someone can't hear me. Is this on? Is it on?
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to warm you up with one cute story, our cute meet. And then Lauren's going to read for you, and then we're going to get into this party. Is everybody ready? All right, so first of all, when I first met Lauren...
I'm scared, actually, about this.
I'm going to tell all your business, okay? When I first met Lauren, it was her first summer as the assistant director at Bread Loaf. And applause, please. And I had read her first book, and I was really in awe. Like, I was like, I just want to be friends. And when I went to see her, she was like, talk to the head stalker. She wasn't having it. Then, the second book comes out, and I was like, oh my God, it was during the pandemic. And, A Book of the Little Axe is just like an astonishing book about history and about Caribbean and about womanhood. And again, I was like, okay, this is my shot. Like, I'm just going to try to get in there and be BFFs. And again, she was like, stalker, get away from me. Now, with this third book, I just want you to know that I read this book before it was published because Lauren gave it to me. And I think that is a testament to our BFF status. And I read it when she gave it to me over the summer. It was an advanced copy. And then I read it when she told me I was going to be her moderator here in December. And then I just read it again over the weekend. And every single time I have read this book, I get chills. It is one of the most beautiful, powerful books I have read in my life. And I'm a book nerd. So I just want to congratulate you on 3 books. It is amazing. And welcome to New York.
Woohoo! Thank you.
So do you want to stand up over there?
I'm being told I have to stand and read, so... Okay, so Cleyvis is going to tell you a little bit about this book later, so I'm just going to read the part beginning in Washington, D.C. in 2018. It's a dual timeline. So it begins in 1996 in South Africa, but I will start you in Washington, D.C. with the protagonist of the novel, Prudence Wright. Swollen nuggets of ice fell from the August sky as if to announce summer's refusal to be predictable. A street lamp flickered through the hail-battered windshield of their car as Prudence's husband, Davis, slowed and turned with the road, hugging the edge of the curb. They were late for dinner. Their sitter, Alice, had arrived 30 minutes after the agreed-upon time, and before leaving, Prudence had needed to make sure Alice recalled all the steps for putting Roland to bed, the music to be played, the position of his pillow, the way his curtains were to be drawn and pinned. After, Prudence and Davis had argued about which of the cars to take into the district. Given the forecast, Prudence thought it best to drive the minivan, but Davis insisted on the Porsche. It was a 1959 Porsche Carrera Speedster, cherry red, an exact replica of the car and the poster Prudence had taped beside her childhood bed beneath the off-the-wall poster of Michael Jackson. She had long dreamt of this car, and when they first began discussing it, Davis admitted he had never considered such a luxury. He'd been easily persuaded, however, when he spied the creamy leather seats with barely a crease. They paid the previous owner with a personal check, and the seller threw in an elegant pair of women's driving gloves, one of which Prudence now flipped inside out, using the fleece to gently wipe condensation from the windshield as Davis reduced his speed. Damn, I can't believe how big this hail is, Davis whispered. It's going to cost thousands to get these dents fixed. We should let the restaurant know we're going to be late, she said. They were meeting the new IT genius Davis's firm had recently hired. Davis had been tasked with helping him on board, with making him feel welcome, since he had recently moved from Sweden for the position. Davis seemed now to have forgotten all about the man as the tail of the car began tarrying, the back left tire spinning like a pinball. He veered hard to the right, stopping forcefully alongside the curb. The car settled into itself, the engine at a low purr. Shit, did you see that? Prudence rolled down the window, wiped the side mirror with the glove. In it, she saw the shadowy figure of something lumbering onto the sidewalk. Is it a child Or a dog? I think maybe it's a fox. Davis turned off the engine. They were parked beneath a cherry tree with a thick canopy that deepened the darkness of that already dark night. He switched on his cell phone light. "What are you doing?" she said. "I'm going to go check on it." "Then what, perform CPR on a fox?" "True, you don't leave a thing to bleed out." Davis wrenched the door handle and rushed to the rear of the car. The street light flickered, illuminating broken tree limbs that dangled precariously over the hood. Prudence's annoyance was evolving, changing rapidly into anger as she considered Davis's impetuousness, his lack of forethought, as if he couldn't imagine what harm could come to a Black couple on a dark road. Now she heard the animal howling, the sound muffled yet urgent. She imagined its sallow eyes and hanging head, imagined the staggering profundity of its fear. A sickening feeling swept over her, and she slapped her hands against her ears, trying not to hear its cry, trying not to be reminded of all her own dead. Davis returned. It's a dog, so much blood. He was breathing heavily, attempting to switch off the phone's flashlight, but his hands trembled. "Do you have blood on your shoes?" "What?" Davis said, as though suddenly waking. He wiped droplets of rain from his face. "Blood," Prudence said. She reached for his phone, turned off the light. "Do you want me to drive?" As the street light flickered again, Davis started the car, and Prudence made the call to report the injured dog. "Does it look like someone's pet?" The woman's voice boomed through Prudence's phone. "No," Prudence answered. Yeah, it does," Davis said. Annoyed, Prudence began to push the phone toward Davis when they heard a new, unusual sound. "Hello," the woman on the phone said. There was a low, thick growl beneath the rumble of the Porsche's engine. Prudence peeped through the side mirror, thinking the dog had staggered to its feet, but she saw nothing before the streetlight went out again. The growl, however, blanketed them. "Hello, is everything okay?" the woman said. The streetlight flickered back on and flooded the road with a soft, creamy light, only to reveal a man at the front of the car. His reddened eyes seemed to rattle in his head until his sight settled on Prudence, her breath suspended in her chest, the sound of it like a shovel scraping a large rock. Davis reached for her hand, and together they watched the man. The wool of his coat lay flat and matted. The mud stains on his left cheek and across the backs of his large hands were caked and crusty. "If you're still there, we'll send someone out as soon as possible," the woman said. Prudence tried not to move, hoping this would deter the man from moving too, but he inched forward. She thought to tell Davis to pull off, but before she could get the words out, the man placed his hands on the hood of the car, leaning over at the waist, while his growling, grew all the more menacing. Davis nodded faintly as if giving himself a pep talk before shifting the car into drive. Prudence felt the clunk-clunk of the transmission as the man's growl deepened into a roar. She could see into the dark and empty tunnel of his mouth as he climbed atop the hood, gathering himself on all fours, crawling toward them until he pressed his wet and liquored face into the windshield. Prudence thought she could hear his breaths through the glass, ragged and phlegmy. She wanted to leave, but if they drove off now, the man could be hurt. Davis made a sound she had never heard him utter, a small, sad grunt. He pressed the lock button for the doors. "I really hope it isn't someone's pet," the woman on the phone said, as if in afterthought. The wind blew hard, and the collar of the man's coat perked up beneath his menacing face, which now appeared exaggerated as he launched himself up into the damp air and back down onto the hood. He was stronger than his readiness suggested, and the car sank into the roadway over and over again, as if refusing to resist him. "Not everything is worth saving," the woman ended the call. Terrified, Prudence reached for the steering wheel that Davis now gripped. She slammed her palm into the horn. It was a long and dull and desperate sound. A vehicle in the oncoming lane slowed. The man on the hood ceased his jumping to stare at the driver as though to warn him that he could be next. The other car began to roll away, even as Prudence continued plunging her hand into the horn, even as Davis tightened his grip on the wheel. A single piece of glass separated them from the man as he threw the first fist into the windshield. He pounded that wet glass with such fury that his hands brightened into a blood orange and water pooled at the corner of the man's eyes. Prudence's heart pumped, and she threw herself back against the leather seat as the man seemed to be punching only at the portion of glass in a direct line with her face, as though angry with her alone. "I'm sorry," she screamed. "I'm fucking sorry." When the man stopped pounding and his terrible face disappeared from view, Davis turned to her, confused. Then the streetlight failed once more, and darkness overwhelmed Prudence and Davis until they felt the car rise as the man climbed off the hood.
So good. Okay, so we're gonna start at the beginning. So just in terms of the overall plot of the book, Prudence is a privileged lawyer. She used to be a lawyer, and she lives a very privileged life in the DC suburbs. She has a young child and a husband. You heard about Davis. And you know, the way that the story, it's a braided structure, like Lauren said. And so the past is 1996, South Africa. And we witnessed when Prudence was an intern at a law firm in South Africa, and she went to the amnesty hearings. You know, part of the book is Prudence listening to testimony of the horrors that happened in South Africa, and making notes for herself. And then the other part is Prudence going to dinner, and at dinner, escándalo. She sees someone she used to know in South Africa, and they share a secret that could just tear apart Prudence's entire life. What do you think? What do you want to add?
That's pretty good.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, anyone who reads this book, I mean, like I said, I'm obsessed with the book. I'm probably going to read it 10 more times this year. It's so excellent. And, you know, one of the things that I'm really interested in starting to talk about, I would love for you to talk a little bit about, because you spent some time in South Africa and you attended the amnesty hearings. And so, you know, I'm just really interested. Like, one of the things that struck me when I read this book this last time was that I think there's this really interesting mirror that happens between Prudence as a person and a character in South Africa as a country. Like, they both have survived some really terrible, terrible past history. And so much of the focus is on becoming like the potential, the full potential of what they could be, not despite their past, but because of it in a way. So I just wanted to talk about like how like your history in this country inspired you to tell this story, and how like you crafted this character to in some ways kind of signify this idea of like progress and the difficulty of progress.
Yeah, thank you. So I was in South Africa in 1996, and I sat through a week of the Truth and Reconciliation's amnesty hearings. I had just happened to be lucky enough to have a boss who was like, "You probably need to go and sit through this." And I actually didn't know what to expect. I mean, you know that apartheid existed. You sort of know that, there was separation of the races. But I didn't understand that it wasn't just sort of hoses and separation, but there was real terror, real terrorism. There was murder. There was kidnapping. And so I'm sitting in the balcony of this city hall building, and down below are the family members of people who had just disappeared, and they didn't know what had happened to them until that very moment that I'm sitting there. So one of the stories that I heard was about 8 boys who had been tricked into getting on a bus. They believed that they were actually going for a training with the ANC. And they had a black double agent who convinced them of this. And they got on this bus, and they were taken to a safe house. And they believed that this was an ANC cell safe house. They tortured the boys. They poisoned the boys. They blew them up in a bus, and then pushed the remnants of that bus over the end of a cliff. Now, everyone in that audience is weeping, right? Like, we're all weeping. And I'm thinking to myself, what is happening here? What didn't I know? And I realized coming back home that nobody knew, right? Like, even though this was televised, even though, the whole point was to actually, like, make so many of these stories known, when I got back here, Americans seemed to have sort of forgotten. We seem to have just believed that once Mandela got free, that we didn't have to contend with all the things that had happened. So I kept these notes, and I kept them in a box for 20 plus years. And I always knew that I needed to tell this story, and I didn't know how. During COVID, I had some time, and I just kept thinking, how am I going to share these stories, to share what I knew? Without, by the way, knowing that we were going to be living through some of that right now, but just feeling like it was time to share some of that. And the crafting of it, thinking really hard about sort of how to make someone not turn away. And you just heard me read that sort of, beginning of the book. I really thought long and hard about how to create this character so that you will be invested in her, so that you will be invested in South Africa. So much so that even though it's really uncomfortable, even though there are things that are horrible about that experience, you wouldn't want to put the book down. That was sort of my goal.
You did it. I mean, I felt like as I was reading this book, I really, and again, like, because I read it multiple times, the first time it was like a fever dream. Like, I just rushed through it. And then, the second time I read it, I remember being like, just slowing myself down. But it's just so propulsive. It's very difficult to really slow yourself down as you're reading it, because everything that happens is just really surprising. And there's this level of humanity, I think, in the way that, like, a foreigner coming to another country, I think there's like that kind of sanitation that we bring with us, like the privilege, whether, I mean, I was born in the Dominican Republic, and like, I still bring my American privilege with me, even when I go back to my country, right? And so I just think that there was something just really moving and powerful about that too, like that level of privilege that she has too.
Yeah, I think I really wanted to present her as an American. I wanted to tell this story, right? Like, as an American going to South Africa and sort of not really understanding what they were going to find. And, many of us, if you've traveled to Africa, the first time you go there as a Black person, you're like, oh, I'm going to the motherland, and then you get there and it's disorienting sometimes. Like, you don't necessarily always feel like it's home. There's people sometimes look at you like you're an American, and you're feeling like, no, but I'm here, I'm one of you, and they're looking at you very differently. And there's a scene in the book where she's at a gas station, and and she forgets her money. She forgets sort of the cash that she needs to bring. She's got a credit card, right? She's got a credit card, and someone's sort of like, no, we don't take credit cards here. And she's like, well, let me run down to the ATM, right? In America, another Black woman might be like, yeah, all right, come right back. But this chick is like, no, you need to pay me or I'm calling the cops. And she calls the cops. And who does that? And she's really stunned by this moment. And you can see her Americanness really, really clearly in this moment. This sort of slight level of rage, this sort of, it's incredulous. She's shocked.
And
by this moment.
she waves the dollars in the woman's face too,
and very arrogantly,
Yeah.
like, I've got U.S. dollars here, right? I mean, and we all know people who do that. So, but it was really important for me to sort of make, and I think the word you used was sanitized.
Yeah.
Yes, but to have her almost that naivete that we bring to travel, and to being even the most, sort of experienced travelers, we can do that, and we can bring a lot of that's misread from other people.
Yeah, I love that. I have a question. I'm gonna jump around a little bit, because I have a question about that thread of the book.
Did I mess you up?
You did. You're blowing up my whole plan, but I love it. I love it. We gotta flow, no, because this is like naturally where the book goes, and I feel like this is a little bit of a heavier question, but so, I mean, I think part of what I was really caught up with this book, I feel like I kept thinking about this. And so, like, the central concern of the book for me, like what it meditates on, is a struggle for justice and equity against like a similar impulse toward human supremacy, right? And so, like, these kind of battling in real life, like turn on the TV, right? Like we see it in real time. So I think like the way that you show it, and I thought this was really interesting, was like the way in which we take for granted, like the like the privilege, but also the like we become removed from these kind of symbols of wealth, right? And so one of the things that I really loved in this book was, for example, like there's a lot of mention of Prudence having this really obscene diamond ring. Like it is like a status symbol. And we see her wielded in ways that, to be honest with you, I just haven't seen it in fiction. Like the way that as Black people and people of color, when we move in certain spaces, like it's a matter of safety, us being able to wield our class, you know? And so I thought that that part of it, like the way that it's almost like, it's almost disconnected, the way that Prudence wields her power and privilege. But in a way, like we understand as the reader, she has to do it to keep people she loves safe, to keep herself safe. So it's a little bit of a long question, but I thought that the way that you talked about privilege and power and you calibrated those moments, with Prue's understanding of the trappings of class as a conduit to power, to show how she herself has denied her own humanity at times in order to like become, not get hurt or, not expose herself to hurt. So I just wanted you to talk a little bit about the way in which that part of it then ties with like certain Black characters in the book where like we would expect that the woman at the gas station would be like in sisterhood with her, like would not put Prudence in a position where she herself could be in danger. And then we see it again later on in the book in a much more powerful way with one other person who's like a villain. So I just wanted you to talk a little bit about, because I thought that the book was really making a point about this idea of like the Black double agent and the person that is like really supposed to be, but actually gets rewarded really in a power structure like the society that is in South Africa, the society that's here. So I think that is so complicated and rich, and I want to hear what you want to talk about.
Yeah, but I think too that like one of the things I wanted to express was how even with the diamond ring, even with all her privilege, that doesn't make enough of a difference, right? I mean, like in the end, she's still a woman, she's still a Black woman in that skin. And there's so many moments where she's trying to wield this sort of, my ring, my privilege, and I don't even know if it's conscious. I think there's sort of there's sort of a subconscious thing that's happening, and it works sometimes, but at the most difficult moments, it doesn't work, right? At the most difficult moments, it calls into question like what really will work in these systems, right? Yes. And the double agent that I mentioned earlier, they call them Ascaris. They're sort of Black agents who work for oppressive regimes against their own people, and they have a word for it because many people do it, right? And I think that this particular character in the book is somebody that has figured out that that's the only way. Right? Like that way is the only way I'm actually going to be able to wield power. Like it's not going to be my money. It's not going to be, it's going to be them giving me the ability to suppress and oppress other people. And so, there is this very, very, I guess it's a really tight line that I'm playing with between sort of, how are we protecting ourselves? For this Black man in South Africa who's the Ascari, he feels like he's protecting himself, right? Like he feels like either eat or be eaten. And in some respects, Prudence has to contend with that when she gets to the point where, this man comes and there's this dilemma about whether or not she's going to sort of do the thing he wants her to do, which I think is a eat or be eaten kind of moment for her as well, without giving too much away.
Yeah, I'm like, this is hard to do a spoiler-free conversation because all my questions for you were about like the last 50 pages of the book.
And true, like one of the things about writing sort of a sort of suspenseful novel is that there are a lot of things that become revealed later, and and so talking to y'all is a little hard right now. So.
Yeah, but I think like the one thing I have to say is that I still feel like there were so many surprises. You know what I mean? Like I feel like even like the first time I read it, I was like, oh, what? And I think that's really like just like a thrilling thing to see in a book that is a literary novel, that is like a novel that is concerned with the human experience, that is asking questions that become bigger the more we read. And I thought that it's really marvelous the way that you've done that. And I want you to talk a little bit more. One thing that I was really curious about, because I also felt, so like last year I was at, I did a couple of residencies, and one of the residencies I was at the Vermont Studio Center, and there was the artist in residence was a visual artist, she's a sculpturist. Don't be mad at me, guys, if that's not the right word. But she, her work, her name is Adriana Coral. I don't want to mess up her name, so let me just say her name. I think I have it over here. Adriana Coral. And so, like, her visual art and her sculptures focus on human rights abuses and historical narratives of, among other things, erasure and memory. Anyway, so she did this presentation where she was talking about her work and the way in which like she tries to create sculptures that are kind of one with like nature and that like also are in spaces that have been witness to like horrible human rights violations. And so one of the things I was thinking about with your book was like the nature of it, and like especially trees, and how, in each of the major scenes, you have a tree that's either like providing like shade and like darkening the scene, or like there's,
Look at you, girl, getting all deep.
okay. This is gonna be next level best friendship. That's what I'm doing here. So, but I felt like even when, she goes on like this drive to a part she's never been, and there are like these beautiful jacaranda trees, which I didn't know did you all know that there are purple trees in the world that are beautiful? Okay, I see you over there nodding. Good for you. I didn't know, so I had to Google it. But then even like toward the end of the book, like there's, a crime committed, and like there's this tree over it. So I just, one of the things Adriana Coral said was, like nature bears witness to everything humans do. And I feel like for me, that has such an impact on me that it like helped me like re-envision parts of my book as I was like revising it when I was listening to her. And I really wanted to like hear you talk about, because at one point Prudence doesn't have a home. She lives out of a car because of her mom is having mental health issues. And so I really was like really concerned with this idea of like home and space and nature, and how nature is there and it's like bearing witness to these things. So
Yeah, I love that. And yes, it's on purpose.
I know it was on purpose.
But I think I incorporate a lot of that into all my books, right? Like I do consider myself to be a little bit of a naturalist on the page, and it is really important to me that that we incorporate that as part of the environment, because yes, I agree that there is this witnessing. I mean, the whole book really is about witnessing. Prudence, I was a witness. Prudence is a witness, and a witness to telling stories, a witness to these people who are often hidden and unseen. One of the things about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings was that many of the people who were testifying were people that we would never hear from. We're talking people who live in provinces where, they'd never even been into Johannesburg before, right? And so, and they're thrust in front of this crowd of people to bear witness, to tell their stories of what happened. And I think that's such an important part of this book is all of the witnessing that takes place. I mean, the whole goal in writing this book is so that you all will be part of the witnessing as well, right? When you read this, I hope that you come from it thinking to yourself, I've seen something, I've learned something from about this experience that I didn't know before. And in terms of the nature part, I felt like there were so many moments where she was alone, I mean, it's, she's a pretty lonely person. She's married, she has a kid, but there's a whole interiority of this person who she's keeping so much shame. There's shame about sort of the poverty of having, that she grew up with. There's shame about this incident that happens in South Africa. There's secrets that she's hiding from her husband that she's hoping this person who shows up at dinner doesn't reveal. So much embarrassment, so much shame. And, I think the big question is what do we do with the shame that we didn't even cause? It's someone else has caused these moments. They've caused you to be victimized. They've caused you to be in hiding. What do we do with that? And I think that at the end of the book, I think that's the question I'm really asking is, can we bear witness to our own pain? Are we allowed to do that? And how?
Well, and I think the book also, like what it does that I think it does so well is also, like there's a way in which I think someone like Prudence could walk away with everything that happens, like before the book, right? Like before the present action of the book, through the end, and could end up being really numb to humanity and like her own humanity. And I think in a way, like the journey is this beautiful journey of her becoming more human with herself, like more tender, even as she is becoming more powerful and like, exhibiting this level of agency that I think is really surprising and satisfying for us as readers. Like, yes, but I think you did it. You did that.
Yeah, I think she thought she had agency before, and I think she thought of herself as humanistic and and empathetic. But in many ways, she's forgotten. She's gone to South Africa, and she's experienced this thing, and she really does want to forget. And many of us want to forget. We are living very often in a way that we are trying to numb ourselves to what's right before us. And I think that this book is a challenge to us. Like, look, see. One of the things that I realized when I was writing this book is that the National Party came into power in 1948 in South Africa, and they were a far right fringe group. And nobody expected them to win this election. And they won, and they stayed into power for 50 years, right? 50 years of pure terror and completely changed the complexion of this country. Now, mind you, there was plenty of oppression before they came along, but the kind of oppression that they put into place and legislated was obviously modeled after us here, Jim Crow, right? And also Nazis. And so, I think that what we're seeing today, not to get too political, but I will, but what we're seeing today is a really clear, to me, presentation of something we've seen before, and we're pretending like it's new. It's not new. It's not new, and we know what can come, and yet we're pretending as if things might get better tomorrow. Things might get better if our political party, does something different. Like, no, in South Africa, one of the only reasons that they came out of apartheid was because of action, obviously by the people, but also it required Americans, it required Europeans, it required pain. Pain had to be delivered to this country in order for them to finally say enough is enough in every aspect. And so if we're looking for answers today, we can actually look to the past to see very clearly what we have to do in order to undo some of what I believe we're going to face in the next coming years.
Yeah, I felt like I was, in a way, it's kind of chilling because we know that. I mean, we know that history repeats and that this is part of the reason why history repeats, right? It's because we become detached from...
Yeah, and they take your books, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's like 101, right? It's like rob them of the critical thought. Yeah. So I have two quick questions for you because I know they're gonna come and be like, start thinking of your questions, okay? Because I'm gonna open it to Q&A in two questions. So the first question, because my students are online looking at us. Hello, students. So, I mean, one thing that I'm really curious for you to talk about is just like, how do you think writing this book changed you as a writer? Like, what was something that was especially difficult for you that you felt like you had to master or grow into in order to write this book that was different from your previous two books?
Yeah. First, it's my most contemporary book. You know, I tend to sort of stay in the historical fiction part of this, which was actually kind of fun because I didn't have to like research how people went to the bathroom. And it's like, and I always say like historical fiction writers, they don't get extra money, they don't get extra credit, but like the amount of research that goes into a historical fiction novel is like unbelievable. So, so that was sort of fun. But what I think really challenged me was the suspenseful part of it, like actually getting exactly what you want to be said in a really efficient way, so that you didn't have to linger too long on the page. And I like to linger. Like if you read my second book, you know that like I'm like, oh, the trees, and I do a lot of lingering, and I really love that. And I love it as a reader. I love it. But as I mentioned before, I think the most important thing for me was to get you to the end of the book, and how do I get people to the end of this book to get the message that I was trying to convey, to be also entertained enough to stay with it, and that was hard. I mean, it was really hard, and so I had to sort of go back to like my old days of reading, the suspenseful novels, the horror novels, Stephen King, and all the like. Just how did he do this? How are you doing this? So that was a challenge, but emotionally, we were in the middle of COVID when I started writing this book, and it was a dark time. Does anyone remember COVID? Yeah. It was dark, and I went into the basement and I got these notebooks, and I was sitting there and I was like, do I really want to go here? Is this what I want to do next? Can I write something more joyful? And and so I think really getting myself to that emotional place where I could put on the page everything that I felt in 1996. I had left some of that behind, really not wanting to contend with it at all. It was hard, and I had to be there again. I went back to Johannesburg in January, and the most interesting part of that trip was I went to Freedom Park in Pretoria, and I had this tour guide who was trying to help me find the videos of the particular sessions that I'd watched. And he emailed me later after I left, and he said, I told him the story. I said, oh, it's about these 8 boys who were blown up, and, I'm trying to find that testimony. He goes, oh, which one? And I was like, I'm sorry, this wasn't an isolated incident. They killed many boys on buses. And that really got me. And I realized, oh shit, I need to finish this book. I've got to finish this book because we got to know.
I mean, that's so chilling. I felt like one of the things that I really wanted to say to my students, we talk a lot about like the joy and even when you're doing difficult things, like how important it is to like find that drive to do something new and to take risks. And I don't know, like for me, first of all, I was like, what a flex, because this book is so different from your other 2 books. And like the way, like you're jumping into the arena at the highest expertise level. Like I just kept reading it, like, are you kidding me? And then I felt like I need to take you somewhere, like, just give me all your secrets, because I feel like it's really like thrilling to see someone who has that kind of range. And I feel like a lot of times when you're a writer and you do something and you do it well, like being a writer is hard, and being successful is hard. And so a lot of writers, I think, end up like writing the same book over and over. I think we're rewarded often if we kind of tell the same story in different ways. And I'm just really proud of you, because I think this is like a very risky move, and it's a beautiful, powerful, winning book. And so it's very inspiring for me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're the best. Well, let me just say,
Yeah, clap, yay.
the part she didn't tell about sort of being my bestie, my writing bestie, is that we went to Trinidad last
We did
year,
go to
right? Like we were both at Bocas Lit Fest, and you know, yeah, she was trying to be my friend, and I was like, nah. Um, and then we get to Bocas, and she rolls up, and she's like, okay, like seriously, what are we doing here? Like, we gonna be friends or what? And I was like,
I was at my point. I was like, we have to have a talk about our friendship. It can't continue to be one-sided.
and I was literally thinking we're sitting at the table, and I was like, yeah, I think so. And you know what? You ended up being such a good friend to me. Thank you. Like, I'm so sorry I didn't do it earlier. So.
I think it makes up for a more interesting story because now everybody knows I don't give up, for better or worse. So the last question I have for you is, I think you started talking about it a little bit, but this is a book that I feel like has so much weight. And as pleasurable as it is to read, and as much as like you're gonna buy it, you're not gonna be able to put it down, I'm telling you. But I just wanted to know, like, because it is such difficult material, like what was joyful for you? Like what was a really joyful aspect of writing something that might have surprised you about writing a book like this?
Well, you know, you mentioned before that like there were a lot of surprises. I was surprised by. I was like, "Oh, this is happening! This is amazing!" So, I had some moments like that, and I was like, "Oh, really, Lauren? You're doing that?" And I was like, "Yeah, you are." So that was fun. But you know, the moments with her, she has a daughter, she has a son in the book, and you know, the child is on the spectrum, and I felt like maybe I hadn't seen that kind of relationship on the page, particularly for Black women, before. And so, sort of showing sort of the challenges of raising a child with special needs, and also the really, you know, small, joyous moments of being a parent. Those were good moments, I think. And you know, and then not to give anything away, but there's this part where she has to go to the child's school. Something's gone down, and she's got to roll in like, you know, like mighty mama. And for those of you who know what it's like having a kid at a school and you got to like go and talk to somebody, that was like chef's kiss, right? Because I was living my best fantasy there, and let me tell you what I would do in this moment. But yes, so that was
I
that was
definitely
good.
felt like the cape was flying behind Prudence when she was dealing with these obnoxious people. And one thing that I'll say, you know, is that I felt like this resonated with me because I have two young children. And I just feel like whenever I say to people, like, I love being a mom, but nobody ever talks about how difficult it is and like how thankless it is. And both of us have great husbands who actually like do their part and do all the things. And it's still so difficult. And I just felt like this book for me was so refreshing in that way, like, because I think you are telling the truth. And it's like, there's an equilibrium in the book about like the joy, yes, but also like just especially when you have a child that has special needs or health problems, like you're just gonna be facing things that I just think the whole world just wants us to pretend it's like wonderful all the time, and it's like procreation, it's like relying on moms lying about how hard it is most of the time. And I thought you just did such a beautiful job with Prudence. I mean, I really feel like she's this like giant character, and I keep thinking about her and I care about her. And on the drive here, I was like, just write me another book about Prudence. Like, I just want to see what she's
I
doing.
think she's going to replace me with Prudence. I think this is what's happening.
All right. Well, enough of me gushing about how much I love Lauren. Do any of you have questions? I think we have like, okay, yes, right here.
So I have a question. Like instantly, you said a line about you don't just leave things to bleed out, and it instantly you said a line earlier about how you just don't leave things to bleed out, and it made me think about like change and progress, and how people have this idea of once you're free, okay, go be free, but you don't deal with like the wounds and the scars. So I would like to know like what you were trying to say about like change and progress. this story? What happens afterwards?
Yeah, I thank you for that question. I did allude to that before, and yeah, I wanted to really make people question how much we can tolerate, how much we can tolerate before we give something back. And you know, I'm trying not to give too much away, but this story is also about vengeance, right? I mean, there's a little bit of how far can you push people before they decide enough is enough? And then what does that do to you when you've allowed yourself to be pushed to that point? I don't know if I have the answers, but I really wanted to play with that. I wanted to play with the worst case scenario of pushing humanity to the brink. What happens when you dehumanize people so much that they're not able to actually change anymore? They're not able to grow anymore. They're just stunted in this place that turns back eventually on the perpetrator or on themselves or on their families, right? I mean, like there are repercussions to dehumanizing and oppressing one individual or a whole group of individuals. So I hope, I don't have an answer, but I hope that you at least question yourself about that. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Lauren.
Hi,
And
Martha.
she didn't get your name. Cleyvis? Thank you. Cleyvis. Sorry. I didn't see it. I just wanted to ask a technical question, actually a writerly question. What thriller writer or suspense writer did you find most helpful in figuring out, learning how to do that?
That's good. Well, I've been reading Stephen King for a lot of years. He was probably my first writerly crush, but did I ever tell you guys my Stephen King story? Okay, some of you know, but I'm going to tell my Stephen King story. So I was working. Hi, Ted. Ted is in second row. I used to work with him at a law firm here in New York, and I probably cried to you about this, but I was working one night with an associate, and the associate really loved the New York Jets, and he was actually going to go and watch the football game on Sunday. The deal was closing on Monday. He says to the client, "Hey, you know, I'm leaving. Lauren's got it. I'll be here on Monday." And the client looks at him and says, "Are you leaving me with the effing coat check, girl?" So I had that moment. I walked out of the conference room. I went down to the bookstore on Third Avenue, and I cried. I was crying in the stacks, and I knew I had to get back to work because we worked all the time. And I come downstairs, and I'm standing in the lobby and putting my coat on, and I look to my right, and Stephen King is standing there, and I'm like, holy smokes. And I go up to him and I'm like, oh my God, I love you. And I always say, like, I'm clearly the only Black woman that has ever declared her love to Stephen King. So, because he didn't say one word, not one word. He's just looking shocked. And so, but I bounce out of there. Like, I completely bounce out of that. And it actually made me remember how much I loved reading, because when you're going to law school and you're practicing, you forget to read sometimes. When you're living your life, you forget how much books mean to you. So, so when I was writing this book, I was thinking about Stephen, I was thinking about Karen Slaughter. I was just trying to sort of be Patricia, help me. No. Wait, who said Patricia? Highsmith, sorry, yes. Patricia Highsmith, yes. Which, I mean, I love her. And even though I couldn't remember her name. So, but, I think there's just, some really interesting things that, they don't get credit for. Suspense writers, thriller writers don't get credit for that are doing on the page. It's really, really hard. And so yeah, I was sort of studying that. Sorry, Martha, for that really, really long answer. But I love my Stephen King stories, so yeah. Oh, right behind you.
So wonderful to hear you read. I wanted to hear a little more about you talk about dealing with heavy material, and can you tell us a little more about how you process that, how you move through it as a writer, and also care for yourself as a person while going through that material?
Yeah, I think the question was about sort of writing heavy material and how I personally deal with that. Is that right? Yeah. You know what? In the end, I feel like there's always hope, right? I mean, like I think I leave this book even, despite the fact that, it's heavy material, I don't write feeling like the world is ending. I feel like, and I said this before, but with community, there's always hope. When we have each other, when we lean on each other, when you think about South Africa, right, we're not just talking about Black people, we're talking about colors, we're talking about, we're talking about Indians, we're talking about a whole host of people who work together to upend, a very oppressive system, a very horrific system, but that's community. I mean, the joy is in that. The joy is in the collective. And so for me, writing that story was witnessing these terrible moments, but also witnessing this country that wrote the best constitution that exists on this planet thus far. And they are working really, really hard. And I know it doesn't seem like it. I know if you get the news about South Africa, you can believe that things are really bad there. But in fact, what we're seeing right now with them being slandered in the news is we're seeing tons of them saying, no, it's not true. We're here and we're working really, really hard at being the best society we can. We believe in Mandela's dream. We believe in multiculturalism, but we believe in equity and diversity, that horrible word, right? And they're living that every single day. And it's not easy, but they're doing it. And so I'm writing about this country that I love, and I'm writing about this country that I feel incredible hope for, and I actually think that they might get it better than us. I actually think they're going to get it before us. That leaves me hopeful. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a beautiful point to end in. I just want to also add to everything that Lauren said that I think like one of the things in which I don't know how you're feeling, but I've been feeling really hopeless lately about like where things are headed. And I mean, there's nothing that like actually fills me with more hope than reading a great book. So as you walk outside, buy yourself the book and buy the book for someone else you love. I think that it's just like a wonderful, wonderful book. And like I said, I think it's not just written so superbly well, but it's also like a book that just lingers. Like and I love those books where like the questions bubble up in my head. And I just think that you're gonna love this book, and I hope you treat yourself to it and treat someone you love to it. Lauren will be signing books and personalizing them, so I
Isn't
hope
she
you
the
take
best?
advantage.
She's the best. Thank you.
You're the best. Congratulations.
Is it on? Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, so thanks to everyone for coming out and for the fascinating and witty conversation between both of you. Lauren, on the occasion of your Brooklyn book launch, to say thank you and congratulations. There are Center for Fiction staff members who will direct you to where you can go buy your books and then join the line to have them personalized. Thank you all for coming, and see you all next week and the week after and the week after.